The first recording is 47 years old. The second is 29 years old. The third is 2 years old. They were sent to me separately in different envelopes with no return address and no explanation beyond a typed instruction that I have come, slowly, to interpret as not a request, but a sentence. I have spent 2 years deciding whether to do what the instruction asked. I am doing it now. I am doing it because I have run out of reasons not to, and because the reasons I had, looked at closely, turn out to belong to a person I was before the recordings arrived. My name is Henrik Vieta. I'm 61 years old. I am not a scientist. I want to say this at the beginning because it matters. For 34 years, I worked as a federal records preservation contractor, mostly out of an office in Maryland that no longer exists. My job, for most of those years, was unglamorous and specific. When a federal agency declassified a body of materials, audio, paper, magnetic tape, in some cases physical specimens, and that body of materials had not been organized in a way that the National Archives would accept, I and the small team I worked with were paid to reconcile it. We catalogued, we re-indexed, we made finding aids, we separated the brittle from the unbrittle. We did not analyze content. We did not interpret. We were not cleared in most cases to do so. We were cleared to handle and to label and to file, which is a kind of clearance I came to find both narrow and total. You become invisible inside a security framework that doesn't believe you can understand what you're looking at. I made my peace with that invisibility early. It allowed me to work with materials I would never have been trusted with if anyone thought I was paying attention. I'm telling you this because the credibility of what follows depends on the credibility of the courier, and the credibility of the courier depends on you understanding that I am not a believer in anything in particular. I am not a UFO enthusiast. I do not, as my late wife liked to put it, have a horse in the metaphysical race. I retired in 2019. I bought a small house in central Pennsylvania. I expected to spend the remainder of my life cataloguing my own books, of which I have too many, and listening to the radio in the evening, which is a habit I cannot shake, even though the radio I listen to is now a small black speaker connected to the internet and bears no relationship to the apparatus of my childhood. The first envelope arrived in March of 2022. It was a padded mailer, no postage marks, no return address, dropped in my mailbox at the end of a long driveway that nothing reaches without being put there by hand. Inside the mailer was a single quarter-inch audio reel in its original NASA-stamped cardboard sleeve, with a handwritten label on the spine reading only Goldstone 04/77 EB Personnel and a typed note on a half sheet of plain paper. The note read, "These three belong together. Make them heard." There was no signature. There was no other text. I want to be clear that I did not, at that point, know there would be three of anything. I assumed the note was a fragment or an error. I put the reel on a shelf. I checked my mailbox more carefully for several weeks. I did not hear anything further. After a month, I took the reel down and, using equipment that I still own from a previous life, I transferred it to digital. I listened to it once. I listened to it again. I then sat in my kitchen for a very long time, listening to the small sounds of my refrigerator cycling, and I thought about a great many things, and I did not act. The second envelope arrived in August of the same year. The reel inside was a different format. A small cassette, the kind a dictation machine takes, and the label in fading blue ink read, Tidbin Biller, March 14th, 96, MQ. The accompanying note was identical in font and phrasing to the first. The third envelope arrived in November. A USB stick this time, with the label PXL-7/February 14th, 2024, AT. The same note again. By the time the third envelope arrived, I had been waiting for it. I had stopped being surprised. I had begun to understand that the choice of whether to do anything about these recordings had been placed in front of me by someone who knew, with troubling specificity, where I lived and what I had done for a living. I'm not going to speculate about who sent them. I have a guess, but it would be a guess. I am going to do what was asked. I am going to play the three recordings in order with the brief context I have been able to assemble around each one. I have not edited the audio. I have not done any analysis beyond the most basic. I am in the only role I have ever been any good at, the courier. What you make of what you are about to hear is your concern. I'm 61 and I'm tired and I have decided that the silence has done its work and now I'm done with it. The first recording is dated April 3rd, 1977. The speaker is a man named Earl Briscoe of Apple Valley, California, who at the time of the recording was a second shift station technician at the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex in the high desert north of Barstow. Mr. Briscoe worked at Goldstone for 18 years. He retired in 1991. He died in May of 2019 of complications from emphysema at a hospice in Victorville. I have been able to confirm all of this through public obituaries and one telephone conversation with his surviving sister, who lives in Bakersfield and who did not, when I called her, want to discuss any details of her brother's professional life. The recording was made by Mr. Briscoe's own statement on the recording into a personal cassette recorder, intended originally as a debriefing for his shift supervisor, Mr. Halland, which was requested informally and which was never, to my knowledge, formally submitted. The tape was found in a footlocker in Mr. Briscoe's garage by a nephew who was clearing the property after the funeral. How it came to me from there I have not been able to determine. I will let Mr. Briscoe speak for himself. His voice on the tape is dry and slow and carries the flat broadness of someone who grew up west of the Sierra and never travelled much east of it. He clears his throat twice before beginning. He says his name. He says the date. He says he's recording this at the request of Russ Halland, who asked him to put down what happened on the night of March the 28th, and who suggested he take his time and not worry about how it sounded, because it wasn't going anywhere official. He says that he wants to start by saying he is not, by inclination or training, a man who imagines things. He says he has worked at Goldstone for 9 years, and he has heard everything the desert can do to a radio dish, which is most things, and he has never once in his life reported a signal he could not explain. He says he wants Russ to know that before he says anything else. He says that he was on the second shift on the night of March the 28th. He was alone in the receive control room of DSS-14, the 70-meter antenna, which at that time was tracking Pioneer 11, which had crossed Saturn's orbital path some months earlier and was on its way out of the solar system in a manner that nobody at Goldstone, including Earl, fully understood. The transmission round trip to Pioneer was, by his recollection, somewhere over 4 hours. He was running routine carrier tracking. He was, in effect, listening to a tone. There was nothing to do for long stretches of the shift but watch the strip charts and drink the coffee that the day shift left in the urn, which was always too bitter, and which he drank anyway. He says that at 2:14 in the morning, Mountain Standard Time, he noticed a periodic dimpling in the received carrier. He uses that word, dimpling. He says it was the kind of thing you would only see if you were already looking at the chart and not looking away. The depth of the modulation, he says, was so shallow that the recording equipment had probably not even captured it. It was a feature he saw with his eyes on the analog meter, watching the needle, not a feature he could have demonstrated to anyone afterwards. He says his first thought was that one of the heaters on the receive feed had cycled on. He checked. They had not. His second thought was that there was a maser instability. He checked. There was not. His third thought was that another mission was bleeding into his receive band, which happened sometimes. He checked the schedule. Nothing else was on the dish. Nothing else was in the sky in that direction that was supposed to be talking that night. He sat for a while and watched the dimpling. It was not random, he says. It had a beat. He timed it by his wristwatch. The on portions of the modulation lasted approximately a second. The gaps between them varied, but the variations were not random, and after about 20 minutes of watching them, he began writing the pattern down on a yellow pad. He says he wrote down a sequence of long and short intervals and, looking at the page, realized he was looking at what he could only describe as a binary string. He read the binary out. He says he doesn't remember the exact value, but it was a small integer. It was, he says, the number 7. Now this is the part of Mr. Briscoe's testimony that I find I have to read back to myself in order to remember it correctly, because it is the part that resists ordinary memory, and I would ask the listener to attend to it carefully. He says that he sat with the yellow pad for another minute, and then he picked up the operator's Kaya, which was used in those days for technical communication with the spacecraft when normal command channels were down and which transmitted manually on the same carrier. He says he keyed in a binary integer. He keyed in the number 8. He did this, he says, with no intention beyond seeing if the dimpling would change. It was, he says, the kind of thing you do on a long shift in the desert at 2 in the morning when you have already drunk too much coffee and you are no longer afraid of looking foolish in front of the equipment. He says he counted off the round-trip delay in his head, which at that distance was over 4 hours. He went and got more coffee. He read a paperback. He came back and watched the meter. The dimpling changed. The reply, he says, was the number 9. He says he sat down on the floor of the control room. He says that for a period of time which he could not estimate, but which he believes was substantial, he did not move. He says that what he had just observed could not be the reply to his transmission, because the round-trip delay was over 4 hours, and the reply had arrived in less than 4 minutes. He says he checked his timing. He checked it twice. He says the response arrived not 4 hours after his transmission, but approximately 9 seconds before his transmission was complete. I will say that again. The response arrived before the transmission was complete. He sat with that. He says he sat with it for a long time. He says he then did what any technician would do in his position, which was to assume he had made a procedural error. He keyed another integer. He keyed 12. The dimpling responded. The value was 13. The response again anticipated his transmission. He says he proceeded over the next 3 hours to conduct what he describes on the tape as the dumbest experiment of his professional life. He keyed integers. The responses came back. They were always one greater than the integers he had sent. He keyed a small multiplication problem. The response was the product. He keyed the question, in plain language Morse, what is your designation? There was no response. He keyed another integer. The response came back, +1. He understood, he says, after some time, that the thing on the other end could count and could perform arithmetic, and could not, or would not, pass natural language, and could, by some mechanism that he could not begin to describe, and which he wanted Russ Halland to understand he was not going to attempt to describe, respond before he had finished transmitting. He says he made notes. He says he kept them. He says that they are in the same footlocker as this tape. I have looked. They are not. Whoever sent me the tape did not include the notes. At a few minutes after 5 in the morning, the dimpling stopped. He waited until 6. It did not return. He went home. He slept. He came back the next night. The carrier was clean. He says he tried, for several nights afterwards, on his own initiative, to provoke the dimpling. He sent integers into Pioneer's carrier on his own shifts. He got nothing. The phenomenon, whatever it was, did not return. He says one more thing on the tape, and then the tape ends. He says, at the end, just before the dimpling stopped, I asked it one question. I want to say I asked it in plain Morse, and I want to say I got a response in plain Morse. I want to say that, and I am not going to, because I am not going to be put on any paper as the kind of man who heard things he did not hear. I will tell you what I asked, Russ, because you asked me to tell you what happened. I asked it in clean Morse, are you the spacecraft? I sat and I waited and I counted the seconds, and the dimpling came back, faster than it should have, and the pattern of the response was a single character, and the character was N, which in Morse is -. And then there was another character, and it was O. And then there was nothing else. He clears his throat. He says, I don't know what was answering. I don't know how it answered before I had finished asking. I'm not going to write this down on a form, Russ. I'm going to leave the tape and you can do what you want with it. I want to go home. The recording ends with the sound of him stopping the cassette recorder. I have listened to this tape in full more than 30 times. I have had the audio examined informally by 2 retired technicians of my acquaintance, neither of whom I told the provenance, and both of whom independently confirmed that the recording is consistent with the equipment and the conditions described. The strip chart anomaly Mr. Briscoe describes is not captured on the tape because the tape is a verbal account, not a data recording. I have not, and I have made a deliberate choice not to, attempt to corroborate any of his factual claims through Goldstone's records. I do not have the access to do so, and I am not sure I would do it even if I did. The point of this exercise is not corroboration. The point of this exercise is to make a recording heard. I am making it heard. I will move now to the second recording. The second recording was made on the 14th of March 1996 by a woman named Dr. Marion Quill, who at the time was 34 years old and employed as a senior signals engineer at the Tidbinbilla Deep Space Communication Complex in the bushland southwest of Canberra, in Australia. Dr. Quill is now 63. She is retired. She lives, by her own account on the recording, in a coastal town in Tasmania, the name of which she declines to give. The recording was made into a portable dictaphone sitting in her car in the parking area of a roadhouse on the Monaro Highway, approximately 90 kilometers from the Tidbinbilla complex, on the morning after the events she describes. She made the recording, she says, because she did not trust herself to remember what she had observed in any reliable way past sunrise, and because she did not, at that moment, have anyone she felt she could call. The recording was passed to me with no accompanying explanation. I have not made contact with Dr. Quill. I do not know whether she is aware that her recording is in my possession. I have considered the ethics of broadcasting it. I have concluded that the typed instruction I received with the recordings supersedes my personal preferences, and that if Dr. Quill objects to its broadcast, she is free to make that objection known, and I will honor it. Until she does, the recording will speak for itself. Her voice on the tape is unlike Mr. Briscoe's voice in almost every respect. She is precise where he is wandering. She speaks in complete sentences. She has the academic habit of phrasing observations as if they have been peer-reviewed in advance, even when describing personal experience. She is, throughout the recording, audibly trying to remain calm and audibly failing. She begins by stating the time. It is, by her dictation, 4:11 in the morning. She is parked, she says, at the Breadbow Roadhouse. She has driven for an hour and a half. She is going to give an account of what occurred during her shift on the night of the 13th and the early morning of the 14th of March, and she is going to give it now while it is fresh, because she has reason to believe that she will not be able to discuss it later. She was, she says, the lead receiver engineer on the overnight pass for Galileo, which was at that time some months past its second flyby of Jupiter and was returning telemetry on a low-rate channel during a window of favorable geometry. They were running, in addition to the standard telemetry, an experimental two-way Doppler ranging sequence in which a tone was transmitted from Tidbinbilla, returned by the spacecraft, and re-received at Tidbinbilla, with the round-trip delay used to refine the spacecraft's orbital position. The round-trip delay at that time was on the order of 90 minutes. The experiment was, she says, technically straightforward and operationally boring. It required her to watch a screen. At 23 minutes past midnight, local time, the receive system logged a confirmation packet on the return channel. The confirmation packet was the spacecraft's acknowledgement of a query that the ground station had sent. She checked the timestamps. The confirmation had been received 31 seconds before the query had been transmitted. She says, in her recording, that she initially assumed this was a buffer error. The Tidbinbilla logging software, in 1996, was a hybrid of older Australian-built systems and newer NASA-supplied modules, and the two did not always synchronize cleanly. She brought up the raw timestamps. She brought up the system clock. She brought up the network time reference. She brought up, finally, the GPS time reference. All four agreed. The confirmation packet had genuinely been received on the ground in advance of the query that had ostensibly elicited it. She woke her shift partner, who was an engineer named Jim Penrose, who was sleeping in the operator's cot in the adjoining room. She showed him the timestamps. He, she says, looked at them for a long time. He then said something that she has remembered word for word ever since. He said, "You're going to want to log that as a buffer flush, Marion." She did not log it as a buffer flush. She logged nothing. She watched the system. Over the next 4 hours and 7 minutes, 11 additional confirmation packets arrived on the return channel in advance of their corresponding queries. The advance interval was different for each. She wrote the advance intervals down. They were, in seconds, the following values: 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, 233, 377. She says these values on the tape in the careful, even voice of a person reading a list. She does not, in the moment of speaking them, name what they are. She doesn't have to. She knew, she says, sitting in her car at the Breadbow Roadhouse, what the sequence was, and she knew also that the next value in the sequence was 610. She had been waiting for the 12th confirmation. The 12th confirmation had not arrived. At 4:18 in the morning, the experiment had concluded as scheduled. She had handed off her station to the morning shift. She had walked to her car. She had driven for an hour and a half. She was, by her own account on the recording, terrified less by the 11 anomalies than by the absence of the 12th, because the absence of the 12th suggested that whatever had been generating the early arrivals had been counting, and had stopped counting on the 11th. She brings the recording, at this point, to the topic that is the reason, she says, she is making the recording at all. She does not believe, she says, that the anomalies were a malfunction. She does not believe they were a software error. She does not believe they were the result of any process internal to the Tidbinbilla equipment. She believes, and she wants the record to reflect, that she is using the word believe deliberately, in the sense of having no proof that something used the experimental Doppler channel to insert 11 packets in a sequence into the return chain, and that the sequence was selected because it was recognizable, and that the recognizability was the message. She says, near the end of the recording, I do not know to whom this would have been a message. It was not a message to me. I am a mid-career signals engineer at a station in Australia. I am not the audience for a message that takes 11 Fibonacci values to deliver. I am the equipment. She says, I am going home now. I am going to delete this recording when I have transcribed it. I am going to write the transcription down on paper, and I am going to keep the paper somewhere. I am not going to discuss this with Jim Penrose or with the morning shift or with the station director. I am going to behave for the remainder of my career as if nothing happened. I am recording this because I want there to be one moment, one recorded moment, in which a witness said what she saw and did not pretend otherwise. This is my moment. The recording ends. Now I want to add one detail to Dr. Quill's account, which she does not include on the recording, and which I have learned through a different route. She did not delete the dictaphone tape. She kept it. She kept it for 26 years. In 2022, presumably, she sent it to me, or arranged for it to be sent. But there is another detail, which she also did not include, and which I learned because the envelope that contained her cassette contained, additionally, a single sheet of yellowed printer paper, folded in quarters. The sheet was a printout of an email message. The header indicated that the message had been sent to Dr. Quill at her personal account on the 28th of March 1996, 14 days after her shift at Tidbinbilla. The sender's address was a string of random characters at a domain that I have searched for and which has never, to my knowledge, existed. The body of the email contained 12 lines of text. The first 11 lines were the Fibonacci values in order: 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, 233, 377. The 12th line was a 6-digit number. The 6-digit number was Dr. Quill's staff identification number at the Tidbinbilla complex. There were no other words in the email. This is the email that Dr. Quill, on the tape, does not mention. It is the reason, I suspect, that she quit her job and moved cities and stopped giving lectures and let her academic career, by her own account, in a single subsequent interview I was able to find in a Brisbane University alumni magazine from 2003, slide into what she described as a deliberate professional dimming. The phrase she used was, "My career did not end so much as I closed its door and did not turn the light back on." I had not understood that phrase when I read it. I understand it now. The second recording, then, contains within it the seed of a question that the first recording does not contain. The first recording is the report of an anomaly that did not address anyone in particular. The second recording is the report of an anomaly that, 14 days later, addressed Dr. Quill by her staff identification number. I sat with this development for a long time. I want to say in particular that I sat with the question of whether Dr. Quill's experience meant that whatever was happening had developed, in the 19 years between Mr. Briscoe's shift at Goldstone and Dr. Quill's shift at Tidbinbilla, a capacity to identify individuals? I do not know the answer to that question. I do not need to know it. I am telling you what I have. I am leaving the inference where it lies. I am going to move now to the third recording. The third recording was made on the 15th of February 2024 by a man named Aaron Tate, 28 years old at the time, employed as a network operations engineer at a private aerospace services company in New Zealand, the name of which he provides on the tape, but which I am going to omit from this broadcast because Mr. Tate does not, to my knowledge, have an arrangement with his former employer that would protect him from civil action, and because the relevance of the company name to the events he describes is, in my judgment, not great. The events are the events. The branding is incidental. Mr. Tate is, of the three speakers, the youngest, the least technical in his vocabulary, and the most evidently scared. His voice is recorded into the microphone of a laptop in what is audibly a small apartment, with the hum of a refrigerator and the occasional sound of road traffic in the background. He starts the recording several times. The earlier starts are, by his own statement, false starts. He keeps the file with all of them included. I have not edited the false starts out because I do not believe I have the right to. He says, on the third or fourth start, "Okay, I'm going to try to do this in one go. If I lose my place, I'm going to keep going. If anybody finds this and you can't follow it, I'm sorry. I'm doing the best I can." He says his name. He says his date of birth. He says the address of the apartment in which he is recording. He gives in some detail his employment history, which consists almost entirely of network operations roles at small commercial contractors in the Pacific Rim, and which involves no advanced degrees. He says twice that he wants the record to show that he is not the kind of person who things happen to. He says that, before the events of February 14th, he had never knowingly experienced anything that did not have a rational explanation. He says he wants whoever is hearing this to understand that he is not, in his own words, a woo person. He then describes his job. He was, he says, the on-call engineer for a small commercial spacecraft called PXL-7, which I will note is the actual designation, because it is publicly available in the FCC's database of authorized commercial space communications, and there is no purpose to obscuring it. PXL-7 was a small experimental bus, the size of a microwave oven, launched in 2023 on a rideshare. It was not a high-profile mission. It carried a single payload, the nature of which Mr. Tate professes not to know, and which was not, to his knowledge, scientifically novel. By February of 2024, the spacecraft was approximately 5 million kilometers from Earth in a heliocentric orbit, drifting outward at a rate that would carry it, eventually, into the asteroid belt and out of useful communication range. The mission, he says, was essentially over. He was monitoring it because somebody had to, and the somebody was him, on a 4-on-4-off shift rotation from a windowless room in Auckland. At 3:22 in the morning, local time, on February 14th, he initiated a routine health check transmission. The transmission consisted of a single command, requesting a status report. The round-trip delay at that distance was approximately 33 seconds. He sent the command. He waited. At 3:22 and 34 seconds, he received a response. The response was nominal. The spacecraft reported all systems healthy. He logged the response. He was about to move on to the next item in his shift checklist. At 3:26, 4 minutes later, he received a second response. The second response was, in his own words, byte for byte identical to the first. It carried the same telemetry block. It carried the same timestamps. It carried, critically, the same authentication signature. The authentication signature was generated on the spacecraft side using a cryptographic key that was supposed to exist only in two places, on board the spacecraft itself, and in a hardware security module in a safe at the company's Auckland office, to which Mr. Tate did not have physical access on that night. The authentication on the second response was valid. The cryptographic protocol he was using to verify telemetry, which he describes briefly and accurately on the tape, accepted the second response as legitimate. He filed a ticket. He recorded the anomaly in the shift log. He assumed it was a duplicate packet that had been delayed in transit, which is a known failure mode of long-distance space communications and which he had seen before. At 3:30, he received a third response. At 3:34, a fourth. At 3:38, a fifth. The responses arrived every 4 minutes, on the dot. Each was identical to the others. Each was valid. He stopped filing tickets after the seventh. He stopped logging. He simply watched. He sat at his console in Auckland, in the windowless room, and he watched the responses arrive. They continued for 9 hours and 12 minutes. By the time they stopped, he had received 138 responses to a single command. He says, on the tape, that he did not transmit anything to the spacecraft during the 9 hours and 12 minutes. He says he did nothing to acknowledge the responses. He says he simply received them. He says that around the 40th response, he began to feel, quite literally physically, that he was being addressed. He cannot describe the feeling more clearly. He says it was not auditory. He says it was not visual. He says it was the feeling, he uses this phrase, of standing in a small room with a person who is not speaking and is not moving and is, in some way that he cannot account for, looking at you. He says, I want to say very clearly that I do not believe a spacecraft can look at a person. I do not believe a transmission can look at a person. I'm telling you what it felt like. I'm not telling you what was true. At 12:34 in the afternoon, after 138 responses, the transmission stopped. He waited 2 hours. Nothing further arrived. He went home. He did not file a report. He copied the entire shift's data, including the 138 responses, to a personal external drive before the day shift came on. He did this knowing that it violated his employment agreement. He says he did it because he could not articulate it to himself, a reason not to. The next morning, when the day shift opened the shift logs, the company's primary logging system showed only one response from PXL7. The duplicate responses were not in any system that the company controlled. Mr. Tate has, he says, kept the external drive since. He has, he says, replayed the responses several times. They are byte for byte identical, with one exception. The 138th response, the final response, is different from the other 137. The difference is small. The telemetry block on the final response contains, appended to the end, an additional 11 bytes of data. The 11 bytes are an ASCII string. The string is 11 decimal digits. The digits do not correspond to any field in the spacecraft's telemetry schema. They are, in Mr. Tate's words, extra. They have been added to the message. He reads the 11 digits on the tape. I will not read them here. I have written them down. I have them in front of me. I will return to them. Mr. Tate ends his recording with the following statement, which I will read in full. He says, I don't know what was answering. I don't know how it was using our keys. I don't know what the 11 digits are. I think they are not for me. I think the spacecraft, or what was using the spacecraft, was answering the way a person answers when they have been practicing what they're going to say. Each of the first 137 responses was the same because it was the rehearsal. The 138th was the line. I think the line was delivered. I don't think it was delivered to me. I am sending this to somebody who might know what it means. I have done my part. I'm sorry if that sounds dramatic. I don't know how else to say it. Good night. The recording ends. Now I will tell you what I have done with the 11 digits. I did not, at first, do anything. I sat with them for a period of approximately 3 months. They were, in their format, 11 decimal digits with no separators. They were not a phone number in any country I could identify. They were not a coordinate. They were not, by any analysis I attempted, a date or a timestamp in any standard format. They were 11 digits. In the spring of 2023, on a Saturday morning, sitting at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, I did the thing that almost any person in the 21st century would do with 11 digits they did not understand. I typed them into a search engine. I got one result. The result was a record in a publicly accessible genealogical database, the name of which I am not going to disclose because I do not wish to direct traffic to it. The record was an entry under a personal name. The name was not one I recognized. The record listed 2 dates, a date of birth and a date of death. The 11 digits I had typed in were the database's internal record identifier, which was visible in the URL of the entry. The date of birth, I confirmed through additional searches, was real. There had been a person by that name born on that date. That person was, by all available evidence, still alive on the date I conducted the search. The date of death, on the record, was 3 months in the future. From the date I conducted the search, I checked the record's metadata. The record had been entered into the database 16 months earlier in November of 2021. It had been entered, in other words, before Mr. Tate's spacecraft had received its 138th response. It had been entered before the 11 digits had been appended to that response. The record had been waiting on a public genealogical database for 16 months to be found. I did nothing. I checked the record again, weekly, for the next 3 months. The date of death, when it arrived, remained in the future. And then it did not. The person to whom the record referred died on the date the record had specified, of causes that I have not investigated and that I do not believe it is my business to investigate. I read the obituary in a regional newspaper from a country that is not mine. The obituary was brief. The person had been a private individual. They had no apparent connection to any space program, any signals project, any communications work of any kind, any of the institutions I have named in this recording. They had been, by every available account, an ordinary person with an ordinary life, who had died on the date that a small spacecraft, on its way out of the solar system, had named. I sat with this for a long time. I'm going to make some observations now, and then I'm going to stop. The 3 recordings, in the order I have just played them, span 47 years. They were made by 3 people who, as far as I can determine, did not know one another, and who worked at 3 different facilities, on 3 different continents, for 3 different missions, in 3 different decades. The phenomena they describe are not identical, but they share a feature. In each case, a transmission was received from deep space that should not have been possible, and in each case, the impossibility of the reception was, on examination, a feature rather than a defect. Mr. Briscoe's responses arrived before his transmissions completed. Dr. Quill's responses arrived before her queries were sent. Mr. Tate's responses arrived with valid authentication that should have required physical access to a key on Earth. In each case, the phenomenon could be described, charitably, as a system answering questions that were not yet fully asked, with information that was not yet fully transmitted. I do not believe these were 3 unrelated phenomena. I believe, and I want to be careful with the word, because I am not, as I said at the beginning, a believer by inclination. I believe that the 3 recordings, in the order I have played them, are 3 parts of a single transmission. The first part was a demonstration that the channel could be opened. The second part was a demonstration that the channel could identify an individual. The third part was the message. The 11 digits were not a code, they were a citation. They pointed to a record in a public database that had been prepositioned to be found. I do not know who prepositioned the record. I do not know what mechanism allows for a record to be entered in a database in advance of a transmission that will eventually point to it. I am aware that such a mechanism, if it exists, has implications that exceed my professional vocabulary. I am not going to attempt to describe those implications. I am going to leave them where they sit. I will say one further thing. The person who died on the date that the 11 digits specified was not, as far as I have been able to determine, anyone of any particular importance. They were not a public figure. They were not a person whose death has, to my knowledge, caused any change in any system that I can observe. They were a person. They lived a life. They died on a date. The transmission across 47 years, across 3 continents, across the entire output of a small space industry that costs billions of dollars to operate, named one ordinary person's date of death. That is what the message was. I have asked myself, many times, what that means. I have a theory. I do not endorse it. I am going to state it once and then I am going to be silent about it. My theory is that the transmissions were not addressed to me and were not addressed to Mr. Briscoe or Dr. Quill or Mr. Tate. The transmissions were addressed, in the manner of a long and careful demonstration, to a specific person, who would, on hearing the 3 recordings played in order, recognize the 11 digits and would understand what the message had been all along. That person is not me. I have checked the database record. The person whose death was named is not anyone I knew. I'm not the audience for this message. None of the people in the recordings were the audience for this message. We were, all of us, the equipment. Somewhere, possibly listening to this recording, possibly hearing about it secondhand from a friend, possibly stumbling across it years from now, there is a person for whom the 11 digits will mean something other than what they mean to me. That person will hear the digits and will understand who is being named. That person will know whether they were the one who entered the record or whether they were the one expecting to find it, or whether they were the one to whom the date matters in some way I cannot see. I'm not going to read the digits on this recording. I have decided that I will not. I have made that decision against the typed instruction that accompanied the 3 reels, which said that they belong together and should be made heard. I have decided that the 3 recordings will be made heard, but the 11 digits will not. If the person to whom this message is addressed is meant to receive it, they will receive it through some other path. They will not receive it from me. This is the one act of refusal I am permitting myself. I have done what was asked, almost entirely. I have been the courier. I have brought the 3 voices forward. I have not analyzed them. I have not corroborated them. I have not investigated them. I have laid them down in front of you in the order in which they were given to me. The work is done. I want to say, in closing, that I do not know what to do with the rest of my life. I am 61. I have, by actuarial expectation, perhaps 20 years remaining, perhaps fewer. I had intended to spend those years in quiet. I am not certain anymore what quiet means. I have been a custodian of records for a very long time, and I had imagined that custodianship was a neutral activity, the moving of paper from one place to another, the labeling of tapes, the closing of file boxes. I no longer believe that. I believe that the act of placing one thing next to another thing in the right order, with the right context, is the act that creates meaning where no meaning previously existed. The 3 recordings, separately, are 3 anomalies. Together, in order, they are a sentence. I have spoken the sentence. I cannot take it back. I want to say to whoever sent me the recordings, if they are listening, that I have done what you asked. I would prefer, if it is possible, that you not send me anything else. I am tired, and I would like to be left alone. I have a small house and a small life, and I would like to keep them. I do not know if my preference matters. I am stating it for the record. I want to say to Mr. Briscoe, who is dead, that I am sorry his tape ended up in a stranger's mailbox. I think you were a careful and honest man, and I think you deserved a better audience than me. I have done what I can for you. I want to say to Dr. Quill, who is alive, that I have not contacted you, and I will not, unless you wish to be contacted. If you hear this recording, you will know it is me. You can find my name in the Federal Contractor Registries. I am not difficult to reach. I will receive what you wish to say to me. I want to say to Mr. Tate, who is also alive, that I do not know whether you intended for your recording to end up where it has ended up. I think you might have intended it. You said on the tape that you were sending it to somebody who might know what it means. I am not that somebody. I do not know what it means. I am the somebody who passed it along. And I want to say finally to the person in the audience for whom this message was meant. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whether you are listening to this in the evening, on your phone, or in the morning, at a desk, or in the middle of the night because you cannot sleep, I want to say to you that I am sorry. I am sorry that you are receiving the message this way, through a stranger, in a recording made in a kitchen in Pennsylvania, with the refrigerator cycling in the background. I'm sorry that the message took 47 years to assemble and that 3 other people had to be its equipment. I'm sorry that I will not read the digits to you because I have decided that I have done enough. If you are out there and you know who you are, I would ask one thing of you. I would ask you to consider, when you have understood the message, whether you have a piece of it that the rest of us do not. There is a 4th part. There must be. A demonstration, an identification, a citation. These are not a complete transmission. There is something the citation points to. The genealogical record is the address. The address must, by the logic of an address, lead somewhere. I do not know where. I think you might. I think you might have known, in some quiet way you have not been able to articulate, that you were waiting for this. I think the message has now arrived. I'm going to turn off the recorder. I'm going to sit in my kitchen for a while. I'm going to listen to the radio. I'm going to make my peace as best I can with the fact that the silence I have lived in for 61 years was not, as it turned out, my silence. It was someone else's silence, and they have asked for it back. I hope you find what you are looking for. I hope you're kind to it when you find it. I hope, if there is any kindness left in the universe to be hoped for, that the message you have just received turns out to be a smaller thing than I am afraid it is. This has been Henrik Vetter. The recordings have been the testimonies of Earl Briscoe, Marion Quill, and Aaron Tate. The transmissions began in 1977 and ended in 2024. The fourth transmission, if there is one, will not pass through me. It will pass through you. Good night.